Welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about the mental change. We will.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I am thrilled that you are joining us today. If this is your first time, Alzheimer Speaks is about sound information, not just sound bites. We like to have real conversations with real people. So maybe, just maybe, you can be our next guest. Reach out to me at radio@Alzheimer Speaks if that sounds of interest. Before I introduce our guest, I want to do a couple of shout outs. One is to Maud's Ventures. They are giving seed money for 3 new categories, and you can go to maudsventures.org to possibly win $50,000 to $100,000 for each item that they are looking to sponsor. And I am thrilled to say that Alzheimer Speaks has finally updated our website. So go visit alzheimerspeaks.com and make sure you check out our free educational resources. You will be thrilled to see what's out there. You can find information about support groups and events, from radio shows to dementia chats to poetry, arts and dementia, memory cafes, dementia-friendly communities, and so much more. Again, alzheimerspeaks.com is where you can find that information. And then the Memory Camp in Wisconsin is going to be open August 15th to the 18th, and you can register by calling 715-479-8255. We're going to hear from the Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner, and then we'll be right back with our guests.
I love the footbar walker, and let me tell you why. It is the option for my toolbox that I've been waiting for. Let's be honest, there are some clients who, despite our best rehab efforts, just aren't able to return to performing a sit-to-stand transfer on their own. Now I can offer my caregivers an easier, safer option that doesn't involve hoisting their loved one up from a sitting position. I don't recommend this walker for all of my clients, but I do recommend this walker for those caregivers looking for an easier, safer option with transfers. I would also encourage other therapists to add this walker to their toolbox. It's kind of like having my own mobile parallel bars for the client to pull up on. Whether it's a family caregiver at home helping a loved one with Parkinson's or dementia, CNAs in a long-term care facility assisting their patients, or therapists adapting to client and caregiver specific needs, we now have a very safe and effective option to offer in the footbar walker. Check this product out at thefootbarwalker.com. That's it for today from Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner. Have a great day, and don't forget, if you can't do it, adapt it.
We are back, and we are going to be talking about the magic of music therapy. And I am so excited because this is like really near and dear to my heart. So I am going to introduce you today to a wonderful woman who I just recently met, and I'm really anxious to have this conversation because music and magical moments, I think, just happen. And she is a musical therapist all the way over in Perth in Western Australia, and her name is Hayley Antipas. She is the Director of Attuned Health, and she has a passion for working in aged care. And I think you're going to see that come out through her personality as we talk today. She works a lot with people with neurological diseases and disabilities, as well as community health settings. And she's also working on a research effort of innovative music therapy informed technology on residential aged care workforce too. So we'll hear about that. I love hearing about research in that area. So Hayley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Laurie. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the show and to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, I know we have a nice time difference going on, so I always appreciate when I'm talking to somebody on the other side of the world when we can make when we can make our time zones work out. I always like to start out asking everybody if they have been personally touched by any form of dementia in their own family or circle of friends.
Actually, I have my grandmother, or my yaya, as we called her, actually had vascular dementia. So she passed away a few years ago now from that. But it was really difficult to see her being vascular dementia as well, kind of progress in such large steps. So really the degeneration happens kind of quite suddenly.
Mhm.
So that was difficult. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we start with talking about music therapy and what brought you to that? Because I know there's quite a bit of schooling, and I don't think people realize all the hoops you have to jump through to become a music therapist. So tell
Yeah.
us if there was like a moment where you just thought, this is what I want to do. Just give us a little history on yourself.
Actually, there was that moment, there was that light bulb, but I'll take you back to before the light bulb moment. And even when I was coming out of high school, I had been playing the flute for many years, so wanted to continue music, but I also had this real interest in medicine. So it was kind of applying to university to either do music or kind of biochemistry and microbiology. So there was
Okay.
this real dichotomy. I ended up doing music, completed my Bachelor of Music, specializing in classical performance, and then really moved away from music for many, many years because I didn't want to be a teacher. At that stage, knew I didn't want to be a performer, and there just wasn't another space for a musician. So I moved away from music for many years and then happened to be at a jazz concert one night in this lovely little jazz bar in Perth we've got. It's called the Ellington. If you're over here, you'll have to come visit. It's a beautiful spot. Um, and the artist that was on that night started to talk about a jazz singer, Melody Gardot, who had quite a catastrophic accident and brain injury. And part of her rehabilitation was music therapy. And I vividly remember sitting in the audience, and it was that light bulb moment. I just saw, what? There's a profession where I can use music and combine that interest in medicine and health and support people. So that was many years ago now. And I then pivoted my whole career, started looking into music therapy, went back and did my master's in music therapy to become registered. And you're quite right, there's lots of hoops in Australia. Currently, there's only a master's course, so you need to have an undergrad and a master's. And in the US, I believe it might even be a little bit more. So in the US, the equivalent qualification would be a board certified music therapist. And in Australia, we call ourselves a registered music therapist. So lots of
Okay.
different terminology.
It is tricky, and there's a lot of people that do music, and lay people say, well, they're a music therapist, and I know
Mm,
some music therapists get really upset over that. No, they haven't had the training. They're an entertainer using music,
yeah,
And there's a big difference. But I was shocked to learn all the stuff you guys have to go through.
yeah,
It was really pretty amazing, and the time and the money of going through school for that long in itself is a ton. And
yeah.
do you guys have like internships and stuff that you have to do?
Yeah, we do. In the US, it's called an internship. Over here, we call it a clinical placement, but there's close to 1,000 hours, depending on what part of the world you're in,
Mhm.
could be more of that clinical training internship. So it is a real struggle for a lot of people. You're working for nigh on nothing for quite a while just to get that qualification. So I can understand why some people do get a little bit confronted when people refer to themselves as a music therapist without that training. But
Mhm.
nonetheless, there are therapeutic benefits of lots of ways of engaging in music. So I can also see why people might think they're a music therapist if they
Mhm.
don't have that understanding about what it is.
Exactly. And we all listen to music and we don't really look at it as therapy, but we know what changes our mood and stuff, we just take it for granted. I think
That's
music is such a subtle, beautiful concept that a lot of people haven't taken it really seriously or thought about what it actually does for us on a day-to-day basis. And I think I was one of those people too, until my mom, had dementia. And then I just saw the magic, and her kind of coming out of her shell and back to life and engaged. And even if she couldn't stay engaged for a whole song, just even those, as the disease progressed more in her end stages, she would just get this glint in her eye and this smile, and some of the words she would know, but it didn't make any difference because her hands were kind of going and her feet to the rhythm. And I mean, her whole body was experiencing, this music, and it's pretty cool. So needless to say, you're a pretty strong advocate for music and for people with dementia. There's so many elements that you can use music therapy for, from autistic children. And I mean, the list is, it's really endless, I would imagine, in terms
Yeah.
of who can benefit from that. So what was there one of those moments for dementia that just kind of pinned it down for you?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of moments and people. So I was really fortunate when I first came into an aged care setting to have a wonderful manager and mentor. Her name was Wendy, or is Wendy Hudson. She's an occupational therapist, and she really taught me a lot about listening to people with dementia and trying to understand the experience. And that was supported by a very strong advocate here in Australia who is living with dementia. Again, her name is Kate Swaffer. So
I
really
know
just
Kate,
listening.
yeah.
Yeah. So very early in my kind of aged care career, I was lucky enough to see Kate speak. And that for me was one of those moments where I just went, wow, this is a group of people I really want to be able to support and work with. I remember her using an analogy of being like a swan, really graceful on the surface and then under the water, kicking madly to stay afloat. And that really struck me. And I really felt quite strongly that, music could support this group of people, and I wanted to be a part of that. And then throughout my training, when I had those early moments in those clinical placements, there were several moments where I just thought, yes, this is the spot for me. When you have that connection with somebody, and as you mentioned, Laurie, you've seen it with your own mother, and I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of those moments or seen videos on social media or different documentaries and movies where a person with dementia is quite withdrawn and kind of not interacting with the world around them. And they hear that one piece of music, that special piece, and they really just do awaken. So seeing those moments as a kind of training music therapist was incredible.
I had a couple of friends. One is a videographer, and then one's a singer-songwriter. And they gifted me an hour of time, to spend with my mom. And my mom only, lasted a half an hour, but we got probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 short little videos, because she would be asleep and then she'd kind of wake up and she'd be engaged. And I always tell people, and my listeners have heard this probably a zillion times from me, but I think it's important. I don't think people can hear this enough. I can be having the worst day of my life, and I go watch one of my mom's videos and my heart just melts. Just the joy, that she is experiencing in that moment. And I just thought, I just think every time how lucky we were to capture that, and to leverage that and to give her that. And it resonated through the whole room, of people. It touched, my mom's experience touched more than just her, for sure. And she's been gone since 2014, and I still have those. I've walked into conferences and someone else is using my mom as an example up on the screen, to thousands of people. And I remember one speaker came up to me afterwards and like, I apologize, I should have asked. And I'm like, it's on YouTube. go for it. If the
Yeah.
more we can spread the word, that's what it's there for. Don't feel guilty about that at all. My mom would be just beaming, I'm sure, up in heaven, knowing she's on the big screen someplace. So, well, let's talk about, there's so many different ways music can support people with dementia. And I also think their care partners as well. I think sometimes they don't realize the impact it's going to have on them. Like, because I don't think that I'm alone in terms of having that reaction to seeing my mom's reaction. There's kind of this ripple effect. So why don't we talk about how to support and engage music and some different modes and ways to do that?
Yeah. So lots of elements to that. I think one of the first things to really position is music is one of the most powerful stimulus we have as humans. So it's one of the only things that activates the entire brain, but it also has a profound impact on our hormones, our chemicals, every aspect of our body, as you mentioned earlier, is touched by music. So once we kind of reposition the way we think about music from being, some sort of luxury or just kind of nice to have, a bit of fun, and we think, okay, how can I use music quite strategically or intentionally as a well-being resource? That's when it starts to be beneficial for both the person living with dementia and their care partners. And I am really passionate about music to support care partners as well, family care partners that I work with clinically, but also in my research, looking at how music therapy training can improve the entire workforce. So there's lots of aspects to kind of talk about there. But in terms of the different types of music, it's not just music therapy. So as we've talked about, music therapy is kind of this one discipline where you've got that trained or that board certified music therapist. They might work one-on-one with somebody, they could be working in groups, and they're really working quite targeted on a certain goal. So it could be communication, could be those moments, that kind of emotional aspect, physical, cognitive, all aspects of a person. But then we've got all these other ways that you can engage with music that aren't necessarily facilitated by a music therapist, but might be supported by a music therapist. So we can take our loved ones, if we're thinking about family members or even people in long-term care, we can take those people to concerts, to different shows. Music, as I've said, is stimulating that whole brain, and particularly when music is personalized, it brings up emotions, it brings up memories, which can sometimes be wonderful. Sometimes we don't want to remember a certain thing, but that's the beauty of music. It allows us to express our full range of emotions. So even just listening to personalized music, and something I work with a lot of my clients on and their families, so this is in a community setting, is creating a meaningful playlist or a purposeful playlist. So, if your husband or wife or mother or father has dementia, sit down with them and listen to music together and see the different responses to different music. Talk about what that evokes for the person. Ask them, does this song sound familiar? Does it remind you of anything? And actually curate some playlists. It could be, this is my relaxing playlist. So when a person's feeling a little bit distressed, you've got that go-to playlist that helps them just feel more settled. Or it could be something to help lift their mood if they're, feeling a little bit lethargic in the morning or in the afternoon, something to lift their mood. And one of the important considerations here when we're listening to music is a principle called the ISO principle. I don't know if you've heard of this one, Laurie.
But I'm sure our listeners, many of them haven't. So please explain.
Yeah. So the ISO principle is kind of like, a 101 of music therapy. So we use this in everything we do. And it's really based on the premise that music has a profound effect on our emotions and on our mood. So when we're listening to music that doesn't align with how we're feeling, it can be quite unsettling. And I like to think of the example, if you're out having dinner with your friends and you're having a great night, you're in a really good mood, and then the restaurant puts on kind of this melancholic music, it's really just a bit unsettling, right? You want them to turn the music off because it's not how you're feeling. And this is exactly the same for people who are living with dementia. If they are feeling quite distressed and we put on this really gentle sort of soothing music, the difference is too great. So they can't connect with that music. And therefore we're kind of missing that opportunity for music to be effective. So if we kind of match wherever that person's mood is, whether it's high, whether it's low, start by matching their mood and then gradually shift the tone of the music to help that person get to where they want to be. So that ISO principle is a really critical one.
We hear the term validation, but it's validating where they are and then helping them get where they'll be more comfortable.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like that, if you're upset and someone says to you, calm down, it doesn't work, right? It usually just makes it worse because you want to be validated. You want to hear, I can see you're really upset. And that's what we're kind of doing with the music. We're putting on music that matches the person's mood. And the music is almost saying to that person, I get you. I can see how you're feeling. So it provides that validation, which is, you're quite right, Laurie, absolutely critical in order to be able to shift your mood.
This might just be me or in the US, but I almost, and I've never thought of it like this because I never heard anyone explain it the way you just did, which makes so much sense. But since the term validation is used so much, I think even using that in the defining terms, it just reinforces it, giving them another tool, to do that with, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where a lot of care partners or professional caregivers struggle is at those later stages of dementia where a person might not be communicating as clearly with words. So we really then need to tune into what that person's body language is doing. Are they turning away from the source of the music? That's a real sign that maybe that's not the right song for them. Are they closing their eyes, looking at those muscles around the mouth? Is there a smile coming on or is there not? So really kind of tuning in and watching a person's facial expression, their body, their behavior, and the way they respond to music. That's how we learn, is that person feeling validated? Is this matching how they're feeling? And the truth is that it is sometimes a bit of trial and error, but if we really commit to it, it's worth it. Because once you find the right way of engaging a person with music, it's a beautiful thing.
Well, and I liked when you're talking about, noticing those little things, because I think we all blow past that stuff so easy, that those multisensory communications, we take those things for granted. And it's so important to be more attuned into those than ever as the disease progresses. We're really good when kids are little, we're looking for any little sign. But I know here in the US for our elders, we don't seem to put the same effort in to searching those things out and looking for them. And I think that is an area of training that needs to be elevated and talked about with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
You talked about, different ways to engage. I'd like to throw in choirs there too. And again, personal experience with my mom, when she moved into the nursing home, they used to have a little choir that would go around and sing to the 3 floors. Oh my gosh, she just loved that. And then she got to the point where she couldn't be part, but she loved when they came around, and I know in the US we have like giving voice choirs and stuff where people with dementia and their care partners. And I know the one here in Minnesota they sell out every time, like 1,000 people, for audience, stadium, here. And I mean, it's just really, really grown and gotten very popular. And you talk to the people who participate and they're just so proud and, so overjoyed. I also liked when you talked about the personalized, purposeful playlist, because a lot of times people will put on their music and not necessarily the music that meets the person who they're supposed to be serving. And we used to see that a lot in different community settings, or even in families. They would, if it was the radio or the TV, it was what the care partner wanted versus what the individual really needed. And sometimes they were causing, a lot of strife, with the wrong choice. And I'm sure you guys see that happen too, where maybe there's a beautiful song in their era and you would think it would be a good match, but oh my gosh, that's brings up a real memory of grief and loss or something, and again, like you said, trial and error. You're not going to know, but you jot that down, make a mental note, whatever it is, so that doesn't happen again. But dementia is trial and error.
And I think you have to be curious. If you're not genuinely curious and interested, then you're not going to find the right music for that person, or you're not going to be tuned in to those different responses. If you're kind of using music as a bit of a, oh great, that person's entertained or occupied, I can go and do something else. That's such a missed opportunity for those golden moments of connection and communication. But there's ways that can help. So another theory, and I'll come back to choirs because I want to tell you about why choirs are so effective, because they are. So there's a theory that can help with choosing the right music as well. And this is called the reminiscence bump. And this isn't just applicable to music. This actually, our sense of smell and touch and things like that. But any memories that were formed between the ages of 10 and 30, but typically most powerful between that sort of 15 to 30 age range, for some reason embedded deeply into our mind and into our brain. And I like to call these kind of the magic music memories, because these are the memories that are quite untouched by dementia. And in recent years, there's been some brain imaging studies as well that have really shown that those deeper memories are untouched, particularly by Alzheimer's disease, dementia anyway. So when we're thinking about what music might a person want to listen to, it's not just, what was popular, between the ages of 10 and 30. It's what was meaningful to them when they were that age. So we think about things like a person's first concert, or perhaps a song that their parents or their guardian might have sung to them, or that they were singing to their children, those first times that they met their best friend or their partner. These are the songs that when we hear them, they transport us to another place. And when we think about the different mechanisms that drive how we respond to music on a psychological level, associations and memories are a huge part of those. So even for myself, if I've had a busy, stressful day, I think about my playlist, and my first few songs are going to be validating how I feel. So they're kind of a little bit more heightened, a bit more energetic. But then in order to transition away from that, I think about these critical songs that have a strong association for me. So a song that reminds me of being somewhere, where I feel more relaxed, from a holiday or from a concert where I was having a great time. And they help you pivot into a different mindset. And then we can kind of shift that music. So when I'm creating a playlist for myself or with a client, I almost think of it in 3 phases. If the purpose of the playlist is to shift a mood, the first phase is that validation. Then we have a bit of a pivoting stage. And then we have something that really affirms that mood state that you're aiming for. And the reminiscence bump is the guiding kind of principle there. And I'll give you an example from many years ago when I was working in a residential aged care facility. I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman who would get very distressed. He was in the latter stages of dementia, and he really was, he seemed to be in an uncomfortable place most of the time. He really was having a difficult time. And his wife was very convinced that music would support him to kind of re-engage and to feel better about himself. And I tried for many months with all of the suggestions that she was telling me. And I don't deter easily, but I was really getting to the point of sort of thinking, maybe music just isn't for this person, because, it's not for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she was so adamant. And then purely by chance, I happened to be at the facility one day with my guitar on my back. And this gentleman who was visiting just kind of stopped me and was like, "Hey, who are you? What do you do?" And it turned out that this gentleman was friends with the client that I'd been trying to work out a playlist for many months. And I hadn't realized, but the wife that I had been speaking to was actually his second wife. And they met quite late in life. So she was telling me all of the music that they listened to together. But this friend told me that when they were young, they listened to this really obscure French guitarist.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I put this music on, this gentleman who typically would walk around the facility nonstop just stopped, and he turned and looked at me. And that's when you've got the right music. It's not always as kind of grand as that, but it really brings us back to what was important in that person's life in the reminiscence bump. And this reminiscence bump, I'll just say, it's not just for people with dementia. Mm-hmm. So anybody over the age of 40, your reminiscence bump starts to kind of take effect. So if you're kind of listening to music and feel like you are reminiscing and constantly have this tendency to kind of put on the music that you listened to when you were a bit younger, that there's kind of a scientific rationale for it.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And when you were talking about that, I thought of, when I was a teenager, I worked at a restaurant and we would all hang out afterwards. And a lot of them were musicians and guitarists, and they loved heavy metal, and they got into the guitars, and blah, blah, blah. And that just wasn't my thing. And I thought, gosh, if somebody put that on for me, I'd be like, where's the earplugs? Because that isn't calming. It isn't fun. I wasn't in, I listened to Bread and all these more mellower type music things. And I could tolerate it, but it wasn't me. And so again, really, really important. And for that second wife, that might have been a really difficult thing for her to accept too, and needing, again, a little bit more education of this is why he's gone, he's gone further back in life in terms of what he can cognitively grasp at. And this isn't a reflection on your relationship by any stretch, but I think some people could take it like that. Or I've heard where someone has maybe played a military tunes or taps, and that has set someone off, where someone thought, oh, that'll give them some calmness, but it really triggered post-traumatic stress type deal for them. A couple other things that you didn't mention, because there's so many different things that music can help with, but I mean, even going to sleep or waking up or getting in that mood to even just go down to eat dinner. If you're really tired, or if you're over anxious or all wound up, it's going to be hard for somebody to sit still and do that. And it's pretty magical to be able to observe, if anyone ever has the opportunity to kind of watch a music therapist in action in terms of what they do, because you get a whole different appreciation. Because we started using music with my mom because like I'm more tactile. So I would bring in lotion for my mom, and lotion her hands and massage her arms and her legs or whatever. My daughter would bring in fingernail polish because, we're touchy feely. My brothers weren't like that. And so they were struggling on how to engage. And we were like, well, mom likes music, so we'll get a little CD, player, and you can push a button. They would never sing. They would never do any of those types of things, but they understood she got joy out of listening to Frank Sinatra or the Rat Pack or whoever. And that helped calm them down because she was happy. And I think sometimes people, again, don't realize that ripple effect. It's not always the person with dementia that's antsy or uncomfortable.
And the reality is we're social beings, right? If we're empathetic, if we see somebody distressed, we take that on, we feel it ourselves. If we see someone joyful, you walk past someone on the street who's smiling, you can't help but smile back. Yep. Because we have these mirror neurons, is the neurological kind of talk for it. We like to mirror other human beings. And this is where I really work in particular with aged care providers. So thinking about long-term care, to embed music into their services. Because when we go past music as, this auditory cheesecake or this entertainment, and we really think about music, as I've said, strategically as a care resource, it can transform the whole environment. And by working with caregivers, or CNAs, I think is the term you use in the US more commonly, by working with those people and building their skills, but more importantly, building their confidence to use music, it can absolutely transform their working life. And we know that one of the biggest factors that is hindering aged care services across the world is the workforce. They're incredibly stressed, they're incredibly burnt out. And, we'd be remiss not to mention that the COVID pandemic has heightened that tenfold for most people. So in Australia, we have a massive workforce shortage in aged care, and I see reports that is reflected across the world. So music is something simple we can upskill and train our staff to use. It makes their job more enjoyable. It improves their relationships with people. They feel better about themselves because they're seeing people in a more positive and a different light. And it can actually kind of physiologically reduce some of those stress responses as well. So we're really talking about holistically improving not only the well-being of our workforce, but also the capacity of our workforce to be able to deliver good care. And this is across the full spectrum of age services and supporting people with dementia. But it's really phenomenal when I'm working with these care providers, when staff actually see what a difference it makes for themselves. And I remember vividly, working in a particular aged care home, and one of the nurses kind of came running down the corridor one day, and she was chasing after me. She's like, Hayley, we'd just finished training at that site only a few weeks earlier. And she just said to me, Hayley, I've been in aged care for more than 20 years, and this is the best thing we have ever done. Every aged care provider should do this. And that was coming from a nurse as well, who in my experience are typically the hardest to convince. When I'm working in aged care, that the carers take it on board really quickly. The allied health team seem to just get it, and the nurses seem to be the ones that need a bit more convincing. But once they're convinced, they're the people who really drive it, because we know that music can reduce pain. It can reduce the use of antipsychotic and restrictive medications, which have those negative side effects. And more importantly, it helps people restore their identity. It helps them communicate and interact with the world. And I've had so many experiences where, I'll be running a group music therapy session, and I only know clients from that group. So I'll say things to another staff member like, oh, Mary said such and such. And they go, Mary can't talk. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I only know the version of the person who I see in music therapy. And it's often a really optimized version of themselves. Whereas in that typical day-to-day setting, a lot of the staff aren't seeing that person, which actually hinders the relationship and hinders that care ability as well, because it kind of reinforces that task-oriented type of working. So, it's not to say that music is a magic bullet, because unfortunately that doesn't exist, or a magic pill. But it can affect every aspect of care and clinical services, including the workforce. So it's really fundamental.
I agree. I love that you refer to it as a care resource, because I think so often people think of music and they think of entertainment, and that's probably even why the nurses and doctors and LPNs and things think, oh, that's just an activity. And I don't know about over there, but over here in the US, activities directors are kind of low on the totem pole, and yet they are the ones engaging with the residents the most, that know them. And, there's a saying over here, when mom is happy, everybody's happy. And that kind of applies to a care setting too. If you can get that one person calmed down, that can get the whole floor worked up, or the whole neighborhood, that ripple effect. And even if you're staff and you think you're handling it, you realize you weren't once it changes. You realize then, because it becomes your new normal, that your neck's a little stiff and you're just, a little more stressed out, and you get used to that until it's gone. And then it's like, oh, this is sweet. This is nice to be back in this spot again. And then you
my
realize,
nervous system is so happy.
Yeah, exactly. And when you can get people back into relationship mode, that gives everybody purpose, staff and residents and families, volunteers. I mean, it really is. And even though you say there's not a magic bullet, it's pretty dang close in a lot of ways. It can be so phenomenally life-changing for so many people, because it is bigger than one person. I was thinking, even when you were talking about staff, and I knew you were going to say they thought, well, Mary can't talk, because I've heard that a zillion times from different people. And, I've seen people get up and play the piano, and they're like, and their head's usually down and they're not talking to anybody. And then they get up and they play the piano because that's what they did. And they're like, well, who would have thought? Well, it's not about thinking, it's about doing, it's about trying, it's about exploring the different experiences and believing that you can make a connection. I was just thinking it would be really interesting if you had a picture of residents on a typical day that staff would see, that maybe are disengaged or slumped in a chair, half asleep, and then you show them maybe through a video of what actually has happened in their own community for training purposes, because the story is powerful, but for them to see it would even be more so.
And I always try and include that in some training as well. But I also think, and I just want to put this out there, that it's not always this big, grand, overt kind of response where a person transforms. And that in no means is to diminish what that person might be experiencing internally. So that's where tuning into those really subtle aspects of, does a person just lift their head or maybe turn their eyes? Those are just as meaningful as a person jumping out of their seat and dancing or singing. And I really want to say this because we see so many of these videos online of, a person who's really withdrawn and they just spring to life. And a lot of the time, family members in particular, they expect that, they want to see that, they're desperate to see that moment with their loved one. And when that doesn't happen, it can be really upsetting. And I can absolutely understand that. And part of working with families and why I love kind of working with that whole unit is to help a person understand the smaller moments as well. Those small moments of connection through music that are just as meaningful as the grand experience of, dancing and waltzing around your kitchen with your partner. They're both really meaningful. And I just want to say to any listeners out there who might be feeling like, well, my loved one doesn't respond to music in this way. What am I doing wrong? There might be things, you might be able to change the music or the way you're using music to have a different response. And you could reach out to a music therapist for some support.
Mhm.
But it might just be tuning into the subtle things. Does your person, do the muscles around their mouth or eyes change? Do their eyes move direction? So you could even try something like moving the speaker from one side to another side and just seeing if that person follows the music. That's a really good sign that they're engaged with it. Their auditory systems are recognizing where the source of the music is, and that they, internally, there's a really positive response. And that's a really meaningful thing. And there's actually a PhD student, a colleague of mine, who's just in the process of writing up some of her research. And she interviewed a lot of families and people with dementia. And that sense of expectations based on, videos and things that people had seen came through really strongly. So I think it's important that we talk about this because, there's stigma attached with every aspect of dementia, right? And we really wish and we hope it will disappear, but it's still there. And music is starting to be one of those where, my person doesn't respond to music in the same way as that person. So there's those negative feelings attached to it, or like something's wrong, but there's not. There's really not. We just all respond differently.
That's a great point. I mean, I think of like Alive Inside, and I can't remember the gentleman where he's down and then
Henry.
he wakes up. Yeah. But he loved music. He sang, he did. I mean, that was I think he played an instrument and stuff too. And so that his reaction is going to be very different from mine. You get me smiling. I don't sing because I have a bad voice. So, Lord help me if I get dementia and I start singing, guys. But, it's, it is going to be really different for people. And if someone is very introverted and, just hasn't delved in, it's going to depend on their emotional memory, and how did they react? And maybe they grew up in a home where you didn't react, and you didn't get up and kind of do the Elvis shake and, whatever it might be. You were just, a little wallflower and you were going to listen. But like you said, those signs, to me, those were the most important, the glint in the eye, the little smile, seeing my mom's dimples, even seeing her eyes, just almost fade away because she was smiling so much that, in our family, that's what happens. Our eyes kind of almost close when we're joyful. I look at one picture that we took with it was my mom, the music therapist, myself, and I look at that picture and I literally can hear my mom giggle every time I look at that picture, because it was just one of those moments that just takes your breath away of, gosh, so much joy. And yet I had to explain that moment to a friend of theirs who looked at her and just all she could see was my mom didn't look the way she used to look. And I'm like, this is what pure joy looks like now. It's different, but oh my gosh, I think it's even more powerful because it's so simple and it's so subtle and it's so authentic.
Yeah.
But you have to look for those things. You're right. People have to be taught to look for those things, and that'll make a huge difference. Where do you think we go moving forward in terms of, music and getting people to understand and leverage this more?
For me, I think the number one thing is I want to see our narrative, our way of thinking about music completely flip on its head to So music is not this nice to have, but as I've said, music is an essential care resource. It is a fundamental part of every person's identity, whether or not it's because they love to play music, but music is part of being human.
Mhm.
So I really want the whole aged care industry, from families to professionals to CEOs, to really recognize that music is critical, and it's a fundamental aspect of how you offer care to a person who is living with dementia. And I want all people with dementia to have that experience to engage with their life and to have their life maximized through music. And yeah, that comes down to leveraging music therapists. So, at Attuned Health, the core of what we do is to work with organizations to build a sustainable approach to using music. We train their staff, we build the governance programs, and we ensure that capacity is there. But so that helps a person embed evidence-based use of music into their care services. So that's what I want to see. Every person living with dementia have evidence-based music embedded into their care.
I love that. I love, that you mentioned sustainable too, because there's a lot of programs out there and people are like, this is great. And then it's like, oh, we just can't work this in,
Yeah.
But part of it is them seeing the why and the value behind and the benefits to everybody on board. I loved how you talked about it being an essential care resource, because I'm up there with you. I would love to see the day a doctor can write a prescription for music versus a pill. And not that we don't still need our pills, but to leverage that out. There's this big difference between care and cure, and they have to equal out in terms of where, in my mind, in terms of where we're putting the dollars and cents, because cure is a long ways away as far as I'm concerned. I know they tell us every 5 years it's going to be here in 5 years. But I've waited 40 years now and I still am hearing the same thing on that. So let's get real. People need help. This is something that can calm everybody and just make life more gracious for everybody. And it doesn't have to be, music isn't an intimidating thing. For me, probably the most intimidating thing, and my mom taught me this, was that I didn't have to have a good voice to enjoy music with her, because she would sing, and as she declined, her voice wasn't what it used to be, but she used to be in the church choir and all of those things, and she didn't care. She just wanted me to feel the joy she was feeling, in the moment. And so she kind of pulled me out of my shell, like, what the heck, if somebody doesn't like it, they can leave the room. But it was all about bringing joy to her and kind of getting out of my ego that said, oh, I can't do that. That would be too disruptive. And maybe I did tick somebody else off, and then they went off and needed to be calmed down. I don't know. I guess I never
so this
saw
is
it
what I wanted to say
Mhm.
earlier about choir. So when we sing with another human, so
Mhm.
music is wonderful, but there's nothing better than singing. When we sing with another human, we get this huge dose of oxytocin, which is kind of dubbed the love hormone.
Mhm.
And this is the same hormone that is produced when a mother breastfeeds a child. It is the bonding hormone. It's, evolutionary theorists believe that the only reason we have music is to bond us together.
Hmm.
So whilst there's lots of psychological aspects to singing, I get it. It's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. It is one of the most powerful ways you can connect with a person with dementia. Nothing will ever beat singing.
The other thing you had mentioned was, somebody might not get up and dance. And my mom used to like to dance, so we would dance. And then she was wheelchair bound, and so I kind of would dance with her in her chair. And then she lost more mobility. And actually, before she did lose more mobility, and so then we were down to kind of a hand dance, and she just really enjoyed that. And by the end, we were just doing a pinky dance. And it was, but the more it came down, the more intimate it got and the more spiritual it felt. And I'll still never forget, she was in the arm stage where we could still go that way. There was music on, and out of nowhere, and I had never seen my mom do this. My mom did this crazy shimmer, and then she giggled. And it was like, where did that come from? It was just hilarious. And I can still see her doing that, thinking all those years, I've never, ever seen her do that. And she was just right there. There was some music that happened to come on, and, she just harnessed that moment, in just 2 seconds. And then she kind of went back to, how she was, and just, very subtle and very gentle. But boy, she shook it there for a little bit.
Yeah. It's amazing to see. I hope everybody gets to enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, if you're caring for anybody, again,
Yes.
so much of what we do for dementia is good for the world at large. So put that in your toolbox, if it's a child you're dealing with, or a partner who's in a mood, or whatever it might be, maybe it's yourself, look at music differently, use it as a tool, as a resource, because it is one. It's not just entertainment. Now, Hayley, people can get a hold of you by going to your website, which is attunedhealth.com.au, or they can email you at info@attunedhealth.com.au. You're also on LinkedIn as a company for Attuned Health, and then personally yourself. And you have a Facebook profile, and your social media handle is Attuned Health. And then I'll just mention phone number is 61431-156-421. This has just been such a lovely conversation. You gave us such great insight and stories to hopefully our audience will appreciate music and understand the leverage that they can have over this, or even just talking to, if they've got a loved one in a community, talk about, do you have a music therapist? How does my loved one get to partake in this? Or if you've got somebody on hospice, a lot of times I know here in the US, palliative care, that can be worked into the program. And, but again, people don't know what they don't know.
I was just going to say, please reach out. I'm always happy to share knowledge and talk about music therapy. And if you're an aged care provider listening and you're ready to completely transform the way you offer care, then reach out, and we can consult to anywhere in the world and offer those services to people. So yeah, please just get in touch. We are here to help.
Wonderful. Well, for our listeners, I hope you like, click, and share. This was just a fabulous, fabulous session. And I think this would help everybody in the world to listen to understand better. Because like you said, music is in everybody's life. We all might have different playlists and choices and stuff, but they still affect us emotionally, and can have a great effect on pulling us out of one mood and into another, and helping us live a better life. So again, thank you so much, Hayley. I really appreciate all you do.
Thank you, Laurie. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Don't forget to check out our website. We have updated that. Go to alzheimersspeaks.com, and please check out the free educational resource section. There's lots of great information. Till next time, have a blessed week. Bye-bye.